Well, conference season is over. All the big political events are done. We've been in New York for Climate Week. We've been at Reform, Conservative and Labour, hearing what the British government has to say. I hope you've all recovered. I hope you're back in spirits. But we've got breaking news this week. The North Sea Transition Authority has revised its estimates and they found an increase of 1.1 billion barrels oil equivalent opportunity in the shelf of the UK continental shelf, or you'll better know it's the North Sea industry. It's moved about a bit, it's not just in the North Sea per se, but what fantastic news. This week we're going to discuss that, what it means, what the impact, why their findings change. Sit back and enjoy.
Hello, it's Michael Gove here, editor of The Spectator. Alongside Wolfe Power Club, we'll be holding a fantastic energy conference on Monday the 24th of November. We'll be bringing together people from politics, from industry and from the third sector to discuss the future of energy here in the UK and across the world. Get your tickets now.
So, first of all, we'd like to welcome our listeners from Bermuda today. That's apparently one of the latest islands to join us, so going well past the 70 countries. And therefore, we thought it good, before we go into the facts and figures about this amazing find of the 1.1 billion litres, is essentially, who is the North Sea Transition Authority? Well, they're better formally known to British people as the Oil and Gas Authority. They're still now, to this day, responsible for regulating influence, not just oil and gas, but offshore hydrogen, and then they're looking at the carbon storage industries in the UK. Essentially, it aims to deliver the energy transition in the North Sea, leveraging the potential of the UK continental shelf for energy and carbon abatement. The NSTA is a public body and it's sponsored by the Department of DESNES, and it holds industry accountability for reducing emissions. Recently, it's been involved in the offering of offshore licenses as part of the UK oils and gas licensing round. And while they talked about no further drilling, we've seen a lightening of what can be drilled and what can be further looked into. I was very fortunate to have breakfast earlier on in September in Aberdeen at Offshore Europe with the chair of the NSTA, Liz Ditchburn. And Liz Ditchburn's team have produced a report that they produce annually that looks at the changes year on year of the potential possibilities on the British UK shelf. And it's really, really good news today. So, in the report, and there's a link in the notes below, you're probably wondering, if you're not from the oil and gas sector and you're in more of other energy sectors or looking to get into it, what does BOE mean? It's all over the port. Well, first of all, it means barrel of oil equivalent. So this stops the industry having to report separately on oil and gas, and therefore everything's an energy equivalent. The rule of thumb would be that essentially 6,000 cubic feet of gas equals 1 barrel of crude oil, and a barrel of crude oil is approximately 159 litres, and therefore the discovery of 1.1 billion extra barrels is the equivalent of 174.9 billion litres. So you can see it's very, very impressive. You're a bit like probably going, but Alex, that sounds like kind of Austin Powers numbers. Can you break it down, like you guys have done before in other energy explanations, of what that means? Well, basically what that literage figure means, that if an average petrol station does 8 million litres per year, it's the equivalent of 22,000 extra petrol stations annual consumption. And obviously it's crude rather than delivered British standards litres, but it gives you an idea that you've got 22,000 extra petrol stations have been discovered of the possibility on the continental North Shelf. So what does this report say? We've got a link below, and we're just going to go through the summaries today of what actually has been said and what is possible. So the report is the reserves and resources, and essentially is a combination of the regulator looking with industry at the best possible outcomes and options for where we're going. So first of all, they've seen the proven and probable reserves is at 2.9 billion. It's then saying the contingency resources, known as discoveries not yet fully developed, is at 6.2 billion. Now, where they see the big growth is the undiscovered or not yet drilled parts, and this has been put in at 4.6 billion barrels or equivalent, and that would be up 31% on the previous year in 2023. Now, they've been doing this report in this format since about 2016, so actually the possibility to change forecasts and so on has been there. And what's interesting is that NSTA's objective is not to promote a share price or promote an opportunity. It really is to try and get through to what is the possible on the UK continental shelf. So that's why I think everyone is very, very excited. So this is a boost of 1.1 billion litres, mainly attributed to the new geological data and the reinterpretations of the 33rd licensing round that started in 2022. So basically this is the development over the last couple of years. The report stresses that numbers are resources, not guaranteed production. And I think that's very, very important, because we'll go on to in a second how taxation could potentially make it uneconomically viable for some of those litres not to be done. And also what you're never quite sure is when you're predicting and forecasting is the actual thing when you find these undiscoverables. But what I would say is consistent since 2023 is how they measured. So it's definitely a growth on how we've measured today. So the next bit I think we have to address is the why. Where has this extra literage come from? And here are the key reasons. So the new and updated seismic geological data during that 33rd round of licensing, there was more detailed seismic data and reinterpretation of underexplored areas that allowed the NSTA to identify players that would not have been accounted for previously. This has enabled previously prospective leads to be better defined, thus increasing the estimate of recoverables. So that's really nice. The reassessment of prospective resources. The major jump in 31% has been the prospective resources category. Essentially, it's the yet to find or the not fully matured volumes that have been mapped out and unmapped play areas. There's better reserve and resource clarification maturity. So some particular less certain volumes may have had their confinements improved, meaning that the data modelling supports them being included in higher confidence category. Also previously ignored underappraised fields and licence blocks, including unlicensed acreage, may now be better painted for. And that's really exciting. And then historically, the NSTA reported portion of the continental shelf. The next bit that always gives us opportunity is technology, economic and regulatory acceptance. Now, why the NSTA doesn't treat these as full forecasts, some of the resource upgrades reflect the improved understanding of recovery factors, additional drilling potential and maturation of fields and area. And that change in technology has always actually allowed possible upsides for the energy sector, but this is a step change from 23 to 24, and that's the important bit. But for an example, a certain small or marginal discovery that was previously considered low priority may now be viable to develop, or better data may support its inclusion. Like any report, there's some caveats. It talks about remaining recoverable resources. This is not guaranteed production. And the increase of the 1.1 is not primarily the proven reserves category. It is less mature resources category. So it's basically like there's higher risk to it. And it's a caveat put in there. But in the broader context, the UK continental shelf is a mature basin. Much of the easy oils has already been extracted, and the remaining oils tend to be in more challenging settings. It's also part of the reason why the industry is looking for taxation and commercial support, because the investment they have to do is more difficult to get this energy. Now, why does it matter? That's for a lot of reasons, guys. I think, first of all, there's the energy security perspective. An upward revision means that UK oil and gas supply is actually slightly larger than previously thought, and it therefore influences the debate on should we import oil and gas production or can we use our own resources. And we've covered quite a bit on this podcast why we're passionate about our own resources for the job protection and for energy security. From an industry perspective, it signals that they remain viable opportunities on the UK continental shelf for exploration, appraisal and development. This is some positive news that essentially we have really been struggling for in the last couple of years since the energy profit levies come in, and with job losses significantly happening in 2025. So that's really good. And then from a transition and climate perspective, the fact there are more resources, it means that essentially we're not looking at long distance or long travel resources to this country, and therefore really helps the free scopes of carbon. Now, government position. I was very fortunate at Labour Party conference to hear the words of Michael Shanks, our energy minister. He's obviously passionate about Aberdeen. I think one of the frustrations the industry has is his passion has maybe not been reflected by the Treasury, which, to be fair, he's not in. But, Michael was a very, very regular visitor to Aberdeen and also to other companies that, work in the UK continental shelf, that, like Shetland, the like of the Irish Sea. And what we have to say, though, is, look, something to think about as we go into budget system. The energy profit levy, when it was brought in, the OBR forecast in November 2022, it'd bring in 41.6 billion. But this has been revised down to under 18 billion. Now, the reason that is important is that essentially what was once in place in a very profitable time due to conflicts out of control is no longer sustainable. A commercial position, and I was, lucky enough to meet Harbour at one of the conferences this year, was they actually explained how in real terms they're paying over 100% taxation due to the fact that certain reliefs have gone and the tax they have to pay on their profit side. As a result, it means that they have been decreasing jobs in this very basin. And actually what we want to do is use discoveries like this to entice and empower a company like Harbour to stay in this area. Then a friend of the podcast and met Martin also at the same event in Aberdeen. But basically, this is what Martin said to one of the investment magazines, Share Talk, when this discovery report came out. He said, look, the NSTA report shows that at least 11 billion barrels of oil and the gas that should still be developed in the North Sea. Now, he's one of the leading financial officers at Serica Energy. Serica have had a really strong share price this summer with a mixture of efficiencies, and with a mixture of sort of news building like this. But what he also says, with the right policies and tax regime, the UK could effectively be self-sufficient in energy needs before 2050. And I think that's an amazing statement. You've got someone here who actually invests day in, day out into the North Sea, showing that we can be profitable in the North Sea. Now, in terms of where does it leave us? So it estimates that we've got 48 billion barrels of oil and gas that's already been extracted from UK waters over the past 5 decades. But it classifies the remaining as still in there. Proven reserves, 2.9 billion barrels, so we know that's definite. Contingent reserves, so it's less certain, but we're pretty optimistic. The next category is 5.3 billion barrels, and prospective resources at 15.8 billion barrels that requires further exploration. Basically, it means we expanded by 31%, and this data shows that actually now is the time for government to actually make it viable and see what can be done. But there's some very clear words from the Shadow Energy Secretary, Claire Coutinho, who will be at the Spectator Energy Summit. So if you want to hear Claire in person, come to the conference on November the 24th. You've probably just heard the advert of Michael Gove and use code WPC25. And it's the following. Right now, we're paying billions to Norway for the same fuel we could be drilling ourselves. That is mad. And I think on that note, I would end on Claire's words. It's been a really positive news week in the North Sea. This report is a fantastic building block, and I would say that it's really time to build upon this success story. Thank you for your indulgence, ladies and gentlemen, and we look forward to seeing you at the Spectator Energy Summit on November the 24th.